Godzilla 1962 here, and over the years, Godzilla has had many different eras and projects released, and today I want to go over what people consider the worst of the worst, and see if they really are as bad as people say. So join me, and let's look at what people consider the worst Godzilla media. Let's start with films. Each Godzilla film is subject to what the viewer thinks, but of course you'll have films that the general public agrees is bad, so I'll only go over the generally regarded worst Godzilla films. Firstly, the most famous one, Godzilla from 1998. This was America's first ever attempt at a Godzilla film, without counting 56 and 57 before it. So what did people think of it? Well, they hated it. From Godzilla's design, the story, the military destroys more than Godzilla, and plenty more. Look, this film has been torn to shreds, and I'm not going to be adding anything new to the perspective. There are countless videos that look at the history of the film and why it's such a failure, but personally, I don't mind it. I see this film as a decent new idea for Godzilla, but in execution, it fails. A new, slim, weak, yet agile Godzilla is very interesting and is done great in Godzilla's series in the IDW comics. This version can lead to great stories and new and interesting ideas, but the film failed, and America didn't make a new Godzilla film for 16 years. But without Godzilla 1998, we would have never gotten the Millennium Era, the Monsterverse, and the history of Godzilla has been changed forever due to this one film. But Toho wouldn't make a bad Godzilla film, right? Well, let me introduce you to the Godzilla anime trilogy. Now, seeing as there are 3 films, I'll just generally go over all 3 films instead of going over them individually. These 3 films were supposed to be something new and experimental, but they just got worse as they went on with very little redeeming qualities. The protagonist is very bland, the in-universe backstory is better than the actual story we got, and the ending in the series, it just creates more plot holes than it does answering them. I'd say the biggest issues are the characters and the story. The films are set in a world where kaiju have taken over the world and destroyed everything, so humanity has to leave Earth, but eventually they come back 20,000 years later. This leads to us only seeing Godzilla and a handful of kaiju, with one of them being a kaiju called the Cerebrum, that attacks humans and is the only kaiju seen in the first film aside from Godzilla, when humanity returns to Earth. Look, I want to love these films, but they have a lot of problems, and the main character we follow has one of the worst stories ever in Godzilla history. I'd rather watch Ichiro on the car from Godzilla's Revenge for an hour instead of watching these films again. Now that we have the films out of the way, let's look at games. And I have 2 games I want to talk about. Let's look at one that many consider the worst modern Godzilla game, Godzilla vs., or known in the States as Godzilla. This game was released on the PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, but we look at the PlayStation 4 version, seeing as that's the only one I can play. To understand why people hate this game, you need some context. Before this game was released, the company Pipeworks released 3 Godzilla fighting games, and they're considered the best Godzilla games ever made. And so when Pipeworks stopped making them and a new Godzilla game was announced years later, this would of course get people excited. In Japan, the game is relatively liked, but in the States it is hated beyond belief, with the main reason being that it isn't like the Pipeworks games. The Pipeworks games are fast-paced, thrilling, fighting games that let the player battle the wildest ideas on screen. But this new game is a slow, non-fighting game that is movie accurate with kaiju that move like the films. This game never was made to be like those Pipeworks games. It was made for hardcore Godzilla fans that wanted to simulate exactly what the movies were like. You have these incredibly tall and lumbering kaiju that are slow to move yet do massive damage in the wake. I love this game and it's actually my favorite Godzilla game. The fact that this game set out to be just like the films and succeeds is amazing. And though I will always have a soft spot for those fast-paced games, I love the film-accurate monsters and scenery in this game. But let's go from a game that was poorly received because of fan expectations compared to developer expectations, to quite possibly the worst Godzilla game just to exist in general. This being Godzilla Unleashed Double Smash. I already brought up how Pipeworks released what are considered the best Godzilla games ever made, but when they released the final one, there was a spin-off that they didn't make, but was made to go along with it. This game is a side-scroller that sees you fight off many different enemies and kaiju, but unlike the fast-paced and thrilling experience of the main games, this spin-off is slow and painful to even enjoy. This game wasn't received positively, shocker seeing as it's in this video, and for good reason. It's slow, has bad combos that basically last forever, it's too easy, leaves a lot to be desired. For a side-scrolling Godzilla game, this just isn't it. Just play Godzilla the Kaiju Battle Royale on PC. The game has a bunch of different kaiju, military vehicles, mechs, and all these good ideas, and a bunch of stuff from the Godzilla franchise brought into this one game. But it just doesn't execute them very well, and it doesn't mesh together, and it leaves it being a very crumbled, very bad game. We have gone through games and we've gone through movies, so what else is universally hated that I can talk about? Well, have you heard about the original 1984 Mechagodzilla figure? Back in November of 2014, NECA revealed the new figure of the Godzilla line, 84 Goji. This version of Godzilla appeared in the 1984 film The Return of Godzilla. The figure itself has a decent sculpt and build, until you get to the head. Yes, this head is hideous. It's way too small, too round, snout is smushed in, and all around is one of the worst sculpts in Godzilla figure history. This led to a lot of fan backlash, and thankfully NECA listened. and redid the sculpt into a more movie-accurate Godzilla head. Figure sculpts can be fixed if sewn off early, and the company has enough time before release to fix it. But unlike toys, film designs are hard to redesign once you start filming. Back in 1962, King Kong vs. Godzilla released and quickly became a fan favorite. The one thing in the film people didn't like was the design of King Kong. Now just like the figure before this, the problem people had with this design is the face. Unlike the Kong before this version of King Kong has a more outward face with bigger lips, and his face doesn't look too much like a gorilla or ape of any kind. Advised Toho to stay clear of the original design, so Kong was based on a Japanese macaque. And while we're on the topic of hated suits, let's talk about the most hated Godzilla suit ever designed, Musako Gochi. This version of Godzilla appeared in Son of Godzilla, and despite the film bringing on a flow of new ideas like an island setting, a giant spider, and a sun for Godzilla, one of the new ideas was of course a new Godzilla design. But this design has quickly become the most hated look for him that Toho has given the King of the Monsters. This suit was made in a way so that Godzilla had a more father-like figure, but still looked intimidating. Now this look can work, but one design change they did is the main reason people hate this design. The suit was made so that Godzilla looks more like his son instead of the other way around. Now some may say that if his son looked more like his father, then it may not have worked. Well, that's what Toho did in the Heisei era, and those designs for the Son of Godzilla look amazing. But this one is subject to hate. I believe this design for Godzilla does work and looks fine, but I won't lie, the face isn't pretty, and compared to the suits before this, it could have spent more time in the oven to cook and be better. Now I don't want to give off the wrong opinion. I love Godzilla. Although this video has looked at the most hated things in the Godzilla franchise, it's needed so that companies can learn what people hate so they don't repeat those same mistakes. Though of course things that are hated can have its fans. For example, Godzilla for the PS4 is my favorite kaiju game made, despite it being hated by so many. But to clarify, I love the Godzilla franchise, and I have a bunch of cool videos planned for it with all the new stuff coming out. After all, my channel is named after my favorite Godzilla and it's my favorite franchise ever. But I hope you all enjoyed this video, and make sure to like and subscribe so that I continue to make videos. Godzilla962, signing off.